Good night, good morning. This is one of the last lives, so we are now with Jim, who's from Chicago. He's a renowned science communicator and a planetarium expert. Unfortunately, the weather is bad for here, like you saw with Alex. So I will let Jim talk. But if you have any questions, ask them and we will answer them. So, hi, Jim.
Hi, Victoria. Good morning to you. It's late here in Chicago. But unfortunately, Alex Bratton's clouds came my way. I live maybe 20 miles east of him. But he's very good. I enjoyed hearing him. I like him very, very much. So 2 nights ago, I went out observing with the eVscope. And I'm going to show you slides that are basically from then, but I have a couple others, and I have a real surprise tonight. I don't think many people have looked at the Orion Nebula, but you will not have seen it the way you will see it tonight. But that's a surprise for the very, very end if we get through and the questions don't stop me. So a little bit of background. I'm actually a PhD astronomer who has spent my career working on major planetariums and educational programs. So I'm very attracted to the eVscope for its potential for educational things and teaching. So tonight I thought I will take more of a popular view of things. If I were on the scope now, I would be showing you this right away. It's the star Vega. This is a star that's easy for me from my backyard. I actually have a worse sky than Alex has. I have Bortle 9. I'm right on the border of Chicago. And usually when I'm outside, I hear a lot of fireworks and I hear the dog next door barking at me. And it's crazy, but I'm able to do really nice things. Vega is an easy target. Vega is, of course, 25 light years away. It's the 5th brightest star in the sky. It's a relatively young star, only 500 million years old. And let me just mention a couple concepts as I go along, because I'm not sure exactly what my audience is. It's like lecturing into a dark planetarium here, actually. And the first one I want to mention is a light year, because we'll talk a lot about light years. I won't go as far and deep as some of my colleagues have gone today. They've done a marvelous job. But astronomers think of things in terms of light year, and a light year, always when I'm talking with this telescope, people don't often know. It is a distance. It's a distance light travels in a year. So that's about 9.5 million kilometers. And it's about 63,000 times farther than we are from the sun. So these distances get to be extremely great. And one of the beauties of this telescope in particular is it goes deep, goes very deep. And we play American football and we talk about going deep. This one goes deep. The field of view of the telescope, what you're seeing right here is what you see when you look at the telescope actually through the eyepiece, is about the size of the moon. It's actually about 25 arc minutes. So it's half a degree or so. And not very big. So just imagine that's always what we're seeing when we see this sort of circle here. I decided tonight to stay with one constellation because I find I'm able to do an interesting story for astronomy just by looking at this one area of the sky. This is the constellation of Lyra. Maybe many of you have known this. The star where the number 1 is that we just saw, this is Vega. It's currently about 60 degrees high in the sky to the east. Even in the city lights, my Bortle 9 skies, we can see that. Okay, so tonight we're going to just stay in this area here, but we're going to keep going deeper and we're going to look at different things at different times. We're going to go first about 10 degrees, a little bit further off to the lower right where the 2 is to see a cluster. Then we're going to come back to where the 3 is to see a very, very interesting star, one of my favorites. Then 4, we're going to come back to something you've been seeing a little bit on. So let's now go about 1,000 times deeper than Vega. And this is the first one I wanted to show you tonight. This is a globular cluster. It is M56. This was a 5-minute exposure with the image stacking with the eVscope here from my skies. And you've seen other star clusters tonight. I know the one from the southern hemisphere is spectacular. Someone's probably showing you M13. This one is almost pathetic. It's so small, M56, but I love it. And here's why. Because, first of all, you see all these stars in front. It's like a blizzard. Okay, it's like a blizzard of stars. We're actually looking through the disk of our galaxy to see this cluster. It is, let me see, it's 33,000 light years away and contains about 200,000 stars. You only see a few here, but they're packed in there very, very tightly into its size. The cluster's only about 82 light years across. So you're thinking, Jim, really? These guys showed you M13 or Omega Centauri, these beautiful things. How come you like such a pathetic little cluster? Okay, well, it's because of what it doesn't have. It is very deficient in heavy elements. This is a cluster. There's primarily hydrogen and helium in the stars. It is very old. It's one of the oldest group of stars you'll ever see. These stars are 13.7 billion years old. This cluster formed when our galaxy formed. It's like a lump in the soup that made our galaxy. And so these stars are extremely old, not very evolved. And if you had a spectroscope and could look at them, you would only see hydrogen and maybe in some of them some helium in the atmosphere of the stars. So these are very primitive. And the elements, the point I want to make here is the concept that the elements that we know, the elements we are made of, all the elements heavier than hydrogen and helium were forged or cooked in stars since the beginning of the galaxy. And that galaxy is as old as this cluster. So this cluster, you're looking at the original ingredients on the table that we were all cooked from. So I think that's kind of fun to think about that. So in particular, the atom hydrogen, the most abundant atom, is of course important for all molecules we know about. So anyways, the point here, it's fun to look at something that is so incredibly old and it's primordial. In my story tonight, the next stars I'm going to look at, we're going to look at where other elements are at least coming from now, or where there'd be like pictures showing where the elements that actually made life on Earth came from too. So let's head out from M56, I'm sorry, it's Messier 56. You'll maybe never see this again. It's easy for the eVscope in particular to find it. It's amazing. That's one thing I like a lot is I can find things. I can see a Vega in the sky in Chicago, but that's about it. So I appreciate something that's like a good hunting dog, the one that lives next door. It's usually barking half the time when I'm trying to observe. He goes out at night. Here's the next star. This is the one that was maybe 10 degrees off. And if you look down to the lower left in the circle here, you can see coordinates of 18 hours, 32 minutes, 16 seconds, plus 36 degrees, so on and so forth. The next thing on this circle, these eVscope circles, shows the integration time. And then, of course, the next is my coordinates and the time when I took this picture. This one I took back in May, actually. This is okay, you're going to say, Jim, this is actually less interesting than a lot of the things you've seen tonight. Well, it's my job to convince you that it's not. First of all, Victoria, let me ask you.
Yes.
What do you notice about this star?
I don't know. There's a center in it.
Yes?
No, I don't know.
Is the color? What do you?
Yeah. There's little color, like some goldish color.
Yeah, it's a little pink, actually, I think. And when you see it, even in the eVscope, it's very interesting to me that you can see colors, because it's not just like a regular CCD telescope, but it actually has, it shows color. This is a carbon star. This is the star. Its name is T Lyrae. It's some designation, I don't know, but it's in the constellation of Lyra. It's quite near the direction of Vega. It's 2,000 light years away, so it's considerably farther than Vega. It's about 57 times bigger than our sun and maybe 700 million years old. But the important thing about this is this reddish glow. It's very cool, and it's kind of a dirty star. If you could see it with a spectroscope, you'd see that it's mostly soot and carbon molecules. This is a carbon star. This is a star that has formed carbon in its center by fusing helium together and is now spewing it back out into the galaxy. And in fact, it's sending 1/1,000,000th of its mass every year out into the galaxy. So when we think of life, right, the most important molecule is probably carbon because of organic molecules. And astrobiologists often teach that carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen are the most important molecules for life. There's others involved, but the main ones, and especially carbon because it is the building block for everything. Well, when you look at this little pinkish star here, this is where our carbon came from, stars just like this. And this is supplying the carbon for future generations of life in our galaxy. So I think it's incredibly important. It may be little, it may be faint. And in fact, you could never see this with your eye. I think this thing is maybe 8th magnitude. It's easy for the eVscope, but it's still relatively faint. So we're looking here at the beginnings of organic life when we look at a star like this. Okay, so
you have greetings from many people, and especially from Caroline Collins. Says you're one of your colleagues from Colorado.
Good. I'm glad Colorado's come in. There's many fine people. Caroline's done many wonderful things. Great communicator. Anyways, hello to my friends. Let me keep going and see if they can turn me up. Let's see. So,
don't hesitate to ask questions, hard ones. Jim is ready to answer them.
Whatever. Okay. So let's go to the next thing. Go to my next object quickly. It's one you've been seeing tonight a lot. So we saw hydrogen comes from, it came originally like the original cluster, carbon from stars like this. This is the source of carbon. It's like this, but it has to be recycled into space. But I also want to show you a source of oxygen and nitrogen. And if you've been watching tonight, you've already seen some of this. Here's the Ring Nebula. This has been shown. I think it is the poster child for tonight. Almost everyone has shown it because it's just such a wonderful object to see. It is in the constellation Lyra. You zoom it in again. You could even start to faintly see the 14th magnitude star at its center. What are we looking at here? The Ring Nebula. In fact, my granddaughter who lives in Los Angeles, she calls it the rainbow star, the rainbow ring star. So that's the unofficial name. But what we're really looking at is a star that's dying and ejecting its outer envelope. It's 2,600 light years away. The little ring you see is maybe 2.5 light years across. It's been doing this for 7,000 years, which to astronomers is just a tick of the clock. And what's really fascinating here is that there's oxygen and nitrogen. If you had a spectroscope and can look at this, we see oxygen and nitrogen are in these things here. At the very center, actually, the bluish colors have helium. The oxygen glows in green, the nitrogen a little bit in the yellow, and a little bit of the pink seen around the side. So this star is also sending those elements out into space, and many stars like this are doing the same. So stars are producing all these elements for life. At the very center of this is a white dwarf, which is a collapsed, dying, small star. Our sun will become one day, and the white dwarf, like this, will eventually become the size of like the Earth, and yet be extraordinarily hot. It has to be hot to light this up. So anyways, these are the stars that this is where the elements come for life. That's why I think it's just a fascinating story. And by just taking this amazing little telescope and pointing it around the constellation Lyra, I can tell that whole story. To me, that means a lot. Now, to complete the cycle of life with these stars and all, we would have to then, we can actually look in the sky to look for places where the matter is recollecting to form new stars. And actually in the summer sky you can, but for me, it's over this apartment building where there's a street light, and I'd have to wait till much later at some other time. But one of the first images I took, and I was listening to Alex just briefly before, was the same thing. In the winter when we got our scopes, we took the pictures of the Orion Nebula. And this one's only 100-second exposure, very quick. I can do better now if I had it up, but it's amazing to see. And here's where the cycle of stellar elements in life comes back on itself. And what we're looking at here at the Orion Nebula, remember, this is an embryonic nursery of about 10,000 stars that are being formed, and they're pushing back away and igniting, or at least causing their placental gas to fluoresce. The Orion Nebula is about 1,500 light years away, about 10 light years across. What you're seeing here, the actual nebula is even bigger than the half-degree field of the eVscope. So then when young stars are young and the very hottest, most massive, are able to reignite and cause the elements they formed from to fluoresce, and these will then be dispersed. So there's a whole cycle going on here, and it's really the cycle of astrobiology. And to me, I'm just amazed that we can do this with a simple instrument, even from an urban sky. So that's the big story I want to tell. If people have specific questions, I'll field those, and if you still have time, I'll show you some surprise pictures.
No, there is no question, but you can ask them. Do not hesitate. There's none for now.
Okay.
I think people are still sleepy.
They're too sleepy. Well, the people who are further west should, anyways, that's okay. I appreciate that, if they can write other questions. So what else? So I want to now share one surprise for the eVscope community that's working with this. I've been working a lot with this. I've done since I think February or January, almost every clear night, because of the COVID lockdown and not able to even teach. I'm observing from my backyard, park, which is just on the west side of Chicago. In fact, it's the home of Ernest Hemingway and Frank Lloyd Wright, and actually Edgar Rice Burroughs too has a house, or had a house, just a block away from here. So I'm always thinking of ways to improve and do things better. And I found that the more I've used the scope, the better I've gotten with it, which has been interesting. I've enjoyed talking with Alex Bratton. He's brilliant. He's fascinating. But J.M. Logier, I think from Marseille, also has helped me. And I really appreciate his helping and coaching, because I decided I wanted to put a filter on my telescope, a filter to be able to go for some of these nebulae better, a little bit better. I know he has tried the light pollution filter didn't make much difference. I mean, the light pollution is so broadband now, that's not an issue. But I decided to do an oxygen-3 filter. I don't know if people know about that. I'll explain it just briefly. These nebulae, like Orion, like the Ring and others, they're ionized gas, right? They're ionized hydrogen. They also have a lot of ionized helium in them as well. And that ionized helium can cause oxygen to fluoresce, just like fluorescent lights. And a long time ago, over 100 years ago, some of the first spectrum lines seen from nebulae like this were green. And they didn't know what they were because they didn't see them in a laboratory. They called them nebulium, only an element seen in nebulae. Well, it's not true. We've since learned that it's oxygen. So I got an oxygen-3 filter, and I'm going to show you some of the first pictures. I took them just 2 days ago with an oxygen-3 filter. And the first thing I shot was the Ring Nebula. Isn't that interesting?
And since we're still talking about the Ring Nebula, we have a question.
Yes.
Talk about the expansion rate of the Ring Nebula.
Okay, so it's gone about. That's a good one. It's only a few thousand years old. What did I say? I've got a card on it. See, it is right. It's 7,000 years old, 2.6 light years in diameter. Leave it as an exercise for the audience to divide 2.6 or 1.3 light years by 7,000. The thing is expanding at by hundreds of kilometers per second, much more than the escape speed of the star. So those things are going to come up. So this thing has only been expanding for about 7,000 years. And it will last maybe another 7,000 and then it will, or so, and it will then be so rarefied we won't be able to see it. But what's fascinating here is with just not much more than a minute, you can see a lot of noise, but you don't see the other stars in the background because this filter bandwidth, there's how much light it lets in is only 10 nanometers wide. It's very, very narrow. So, and it just bangs out on the oxygen 3, which you're really looking at helium here because the oxygen is stimulated by the helium. Anyways, there's this one. And then this was 2 nights ago. The clouds were coming in. It was not as bad as tonight, but I tend to wait for the clouds to clear and then I do them. And I turned over to the Dumbbell Nebula. I think some other people have shown it and tried it on that. And this is what I got for the Dumbbell Nebula. So this is, again, 56 seconds. And the background is quite dark. So I'm very anxious. Alex Bratton asked me I should do the comparison, and I need to go out and do it with the filter and without the filter.
Yeah. Since we're talking about a filter, people ask if we can see the sun with a solar filter, or is it too big for the scope?
See the sun?
Yeah, the sun.
I've seen people have put filters on the end of the telescope because you're basically looking at it in white light, right?
Yes.
So you need to, and you cannot have any extra light go in the telescope. It will burn the optics. It's very bad. So you would have to use, it looks like luminized mylar. It's a type of, I think, a good quality luminized mylar. And you can get a white light image. Personally, I would never do that because I'd be too afraid to hurt the scope. Now, if you had a hydrogen alpha filter, this is you could put it in front of the scope. It would be interesting. The problem is those are very, very, very expensive filters, and to make one that large is probably. And you don't need the eVscope to magnify. You have so much light. I actually have another telescope for hydrogen alpha, so it's better to use a specialized telescope. I think my experience. I'm anxious to go look at Pluto because it's so faint, and I know this scope will get it. But this scope is meant for going deep, and so for astronomy educators, I put this in. All of a sudden, I'm not just looking at the sun, the planets, or the moon. Now I'm able to look at things like these nebulae, tell stories like this relatively quickly to an audience. We've never had anything quite like this. I've done a lot of things with telescopes in my life. And so the potential for telling really interesting astrophysical stories or deep space stories has been multiplied. And just the ease of use, I basically can be out in 15 minutes and up and going, and is pretty amazing for urban astronomer. I feel like I'm, it's like grab and go urban astronomy. But again, like Alex Bratton and others, I can't wait for the lockdown to leave. We even talked with Victor Osaka, who I know you'll see soon. Yeah. And we talked about going to Griffith Park with our telescopes in LA because I have family in Los Angeles too. So anyways, I think my time is about up.
Yes. The live is coming to an end. I hope you enjoyed it, everyone. Yeah. And it was really a pleasure, really, to listen to you, Jim. It really, I love it. Yeah, you explain everything really it was a pleasure.
All right. Well, thank you to you and your team at Unistellar. I've enjoyed this very much, and I personally think there's tremendous opportunity for people who want to teach with these things. Take care.
Yeah. Well, we will see us again for the last live in 1 hour or something like that. Stay tuned and see you for the next and last live with Victor. And thank you again, Jim.
You're welcome.
Bye
Good night.
bye.
Good morning. Good morning.
Yeah.
Goodbye.